Hello and welcome to the Scramble. I'm Jenny Liese. Today we're going to talk about the reopening of the federal government with the debt ceiling extension. Also, we'll discuss new laws around Nevada foreclosures, and if time allows, we'll discuss the 9-year-old boy that snuck past airport security to board a plane to Las Vegas. Joining us, our group of panelists. We have back with us Padilla, a senior with a double major in journalism, media studies, and political science. Jason Holley, a graduate student in journalism and media studies. Alex Velto, a junior in political science and a minor in Brookings public policy. And welcoming a new panelist to the show, Kelby Weiler, a senior in journalism and media studies. Welcome. Thank you all for being on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Midnight on the deadline to raise the debt ceiling, President Obama signed legislation to reopen the federal government, fund its operations until January 15th, and extend the country's borrowing authority for another 4 months to mid-February. This is a short-term fix, but prevents the country from defaulting on its debts and causing a financial panic. What are your thoughts on the debt ceiling extension and the reopening of the federal government? Let's start with you, Alex.
I think it's awesome. It's good that we're making some progress and that the Republicans weren't willing to hold the entirety of the government hostage while they try to get their demands. But it doesn't really solve the problem at all. It kind of just delays the process, and there were some parts of the bill that make it more difficult for future enactment of raising the debt ceiling. For instance, the McConnell rule that was kind of put in place makes it a little more difficult for Obama to use his executive authority to automatically raise the debt ceiling in the future. And there's also a lot of issues with the way foreign countries would still perceive what we're doing, because we constantly have to renew the debt ceiling as opposed to just like raising it forever. So I don't think it really fixes the problem, but it is beneficial in the short term.
Okay. Bree, what do you think?
I think it was actually a way for Republicans to get a concession from the Democrats, because they misstepped so egregiously, and not they, the Tea Party pushed them into misstepping so egregiously. And I'm not entirely surprised that we waited essentially till the 12th hour for a bill to be passed. I just see this trajectory in which the American public is kind of getting jerked around, because we're going to have this conversation and be on tenterhooks until the debt ceiling is raised again and again and again. And I really don't see it creating the most stability for our market or our economy anyways. So I think it's a double-edged sword still.
Do you think there should be a debt ceiling at all?
I think at this point, no. I think it's kind of a moot point. We're existing in trillions of dollars of debt as we speak. We already incurred an additional $24 billion just by the government shutting down. I think it's actually kind of laughable that we're pandering to each other about how another trillion. Does it matter anymore? Does it? I don't know.
Well, if you look at actually the Dow Jones and the S&P over the last week and 16 days, there was never really substantial pullback in the market. As a matter of fact, the Dow yesterday reached its record high. So the market's going to continue to keep getting better, at least in New York. Does that actually translate to market health around the U.S.? Probably not. It's just because of the nature of the debt that we have. And obviously it's going to continue to increase. Obviously this is a short fix that was enacted. So it doesn't seem to be anything that's going to change the overall pattern in Congress.
In many other countries, they don't have a cap, or they don't have a debt ceiling cap. Do you think that we should just do away with the debt ceiling?
Well, that gets into more sophisticated economic theory that is perhaps not appropriate to address now, but I don't really think that would be the best option.
Okay.
I think there needs to be kind of a debt ceiling in the understanding that there has to be a cap. And I mean, we can't just throw out GDP and say, well, that's arbitrary. We can't just throw out capitalism as a system, essentially. We have to have checks and balances. And I think the debt ceiling is a good way that Congress is able to kind of check itself.
Okay.
So.
But it also, I mean, in this case, it totally ran counterintuitive, because they checked themselves into a shutdown. You know?
That was more of a political move than anything, of course. But.
Well, yeah, but it had repercussions. And, I mean, arguably even I think Obama said it in one of his statements immediately after the agreement, you can't let lobbyists or business interests, which were pushing the Tea Party, which were initially, I think, essentially the impetus for the government shutdown, you can't allow that to control the government or to check it. So the debt ceiling, I think it's it's just this vague term that we're holding on to try to convince ourselves that there is actually a check and balance, and that we may actually consider a budget, when I really don't think that we do, because we have so many interests that we're willing to be like, well, we need this much we need a ridiculous amount of money for defense, for security, for healthcare now. You know, I
Well,
don't
it begs
see
the question of whether or not the government will ever default, and that's kind of the question here. Will that ever happen? And it's no, it won't. You know why? Because we can print money, and the European Union necessarily can't. You can't go to Germany. Germany can't go and print money. Other companies, or I'm sorry, other countries in the European Union can't print currency, but we can, and that's what makes the U.S. unique, and that's why we're going to continue to keep raising the debt ceiling.
But that's also why we don't have a check or a balance on that, because we can keep printing money.
Aside from being able to just print money, though, I mean, if our credit rating were to be downgraded by one of the big credit rating agencies, it would still make the value of our dollars that we did print plummet, which would make it so we would not have that strong of an economy. There's also issues with the way other countries perceive our economy. For instance, the foreign minister for China blamed the entirety of the debt ceiling on the Tea Party, which is bad not only for the way they interact with our government, the way they try to make deals with Congress, our Congress, but the way, if there were to be a Tea Party candidate that gets elected in the future, it could devastate our relations with other nations because they just perceive them as acting out of their own self-interest. And I think back to the initial question you were asking about whether or not we should raise the debt ceiling, or I mean we should eliminate the debt ceiling altogether. I think there might be a better solution. Instead of constantly raising it, we just make it so we can spend as much, we can accrue as much debt as we want for a certain amount of time. So instead of capping it at a number, you say the next 5 years we can, constantly have more debt. And it doesn't mean that we don't try to reduce the deficit, because I think you're right in the sense that raising the debt ceiling doesn't necessarily mean we will reduce the deficit. But if we say there's 5 years we can spend as much as we want, as much debt as we want, and then we constantly try to reduce our deficit, those can both happen at the same time without having us risk going over it because we just run out of money.
Kelby, what do you have a position on this?
Well, I have a question on his. So if you have a 5-year span where they can just spend as much as they want, does that mean they have to plan for the next 5 years where they have to cut back? So they have to make long-term then?
I mean, I think there's a motive to cut back in the long term no matter what. So even if you say you have 5 years to spend as much as you want, that doesn't change the voting blocs in Congress that want us to cut spending for reasons that are aside from the debt ceiling. Just having debt is bad.
Well, and also most of the plans and things that the plans and the, I need a better word for plans, that they enact in Congress, the funding is scheduled.
Oh, Bree, I'm gonna have to cut you off there.
But I'll think of another word.
We'll come back to you right after the break.
Wow, these are really good.
You act surprised. Practice makes perfect.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of teens in foster care who don't need perfection. They need you.
Did you know kids who play outdoors have healthier lungs?
Totally.
Did you know that boys that play with dolls make better husbands?
My son has lots of dolls. But did you know terry cloth diapers breathe better?
I did.
It's totally true.
Oh, yeah.
Did you guys know statistically friendly kids have more friends?
Yeah.
That's obvious.
Did you know most people think they're using the right car seat for their kid, but they're not?
Parents who really know it all know for sure that their child is in the right seat. Visit safercar.gov/the-right-seat to make sure your child is protected.
NFC, AFC, offensive linemen, defensive tackles, quarterbacks, and cornerbacks are all living united to ensure the academic success of millions of kids in our communities all the way to graduation day. But that won't happen without you. So take the pledge at unitedway.org. Make a difference in the life of a child. Suit up like your favorite NFL players and become a volunteer reader, tutor, or mentor with United Way.
Welcome back. We were talking about the debt ceiling, and Bree, before the break, I cut you off.
And it's A-okay because I found out my word. So what I was trying to say is that Obamacare specifically was a piece of legislation that actually had planned spending and decreasing or improving the state of our deficit was built into that bill. So those things are vetted, and there is that sense of planning.
But it's not doing good.
That's my point, and it is that despite
back to your point.
Despite that, we're still kind of at a moot point. And honestly, at the end of the day, the interests of our government will always provide the impetus to raise the debt ceiling. So I think I'll still stick by my point and think that I say it's moot.
And also the extension for the debt ceiling, that goes through the holiday season. Starbucks, they were against the idea that we were going to push this back and that we were going to raise the debt ceiling before the holiday season. Do you think this could have any effect on holiday shopping or spending?
You said Starbucks was against?
Or Starbucks wanted the debt ceiling to be raised before the holiday season, rather than it just being rather than limits be pushed back to be decided after the holiday season.
Look, whether or not the debt ceiling is raised, obviously it already has been, but the Fed is going to continue to pump in how many X amount of $1 billion per month into the market, known as quantitative easing, those of us that are involved in the market. So if you are in the market, I would say good for you, because the market's going to continue to have record highs in the near future, and perhaps in the coming year, as long as they keep kind of infusing that liquidity in the market. So it's going to be great for consumer spending. It's going to be at all-time highs, perhaps, because people are going to be very confident in their holdings. Those of us that are invested, those of us that have real estate, et cetera. So yeah, it'll be good for the economy, essentially.
What do you think those are the main factors that are kind of causing people to spend? Like, I could see, I guess, how the shutdown and people not getting paid might limit the amount of money that's being spent during the holiday season.
Well, they actually get unemployment and they get back pay, so they're going to have a little more money as well. So another little infusion for the economy. So
yeah, they're getting back pay for all that. And I think the reason the government has this ceiling and the reason we have checks and balances is a mistrust between the people and the government. So the fact that they're just extending it until January, I think the economy is going to do what it wants to do anyways. We don't trust the government either way. So they have more money to spend. It's not going to change what we're doing.
I think it'll be really interesting, because I think that not only do you have this infusion of liquidity into the market, but you also have the market just being allowed to do what it wants unfettered right now, because all of that all those beautiful minds in Congress, they're trying not to bicker with each other right now. They're still trying to hammer out some really important details as to the functioning of our country. So the businesses and the market kind of is able to do its own thing, and it'll be a really interesting monster, I think, in January. It'll be really interesting to see where the market is.
nonetheless, the market knows that Congress is going to wait till the last minute to do whatever they do.
Well, I think it's going to take advantage of that, though.
I don't know how it would take. I can't really see it taking advantage of it, because there is no advantage to that. But nonetheless, they know that Congress is going to push whatever they have to push through. They know they're always going to raise the debt ceiling. That's why the market was hitting record highs. I mean, a couple days ago, when no one knew when the government was going to reopen.
I still kind of see that as the market taking advantage of government instability.
Well, they're taking advantage of the
or
free
maybe
money.
not taking well, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Business interests will always run counter to government interests, which will also run counter to the interest of the public.
That's a little bit overarching to say. I mean,
but
nonetheless.
effective and applicable.
Well, it's overarching to say that business interests run in opposition to governmental interests.
How so?
Well, it's way too general.
Businesses want the money that the government is taxing.
Sure, but that doesn't mean that they're in opposition to the government. I mean, you can't say you have a humanitarian-based company that's anti-governmental agenda.
Well, it could be.
I'm going to have to cut you guys off right there, and we're going to go to break. But we'll be right back after this.
Ever wonder what makes us, the Smurfs, so happy? The forest, of course. This is where we, along with the beautiful forest creatures, make our home with beautiful plant life, clean water, and endless adventures. It's a place to celebrate. So discover the forest with your family today. Visit discovertheforest.org to find a forest near you.
Oh, hey, bud. Where are you headed?
Just gonna hang out.
With Gary and Todd?
Yeah?
I've been meaning to ask you, is there any drinking going on in this crowd?
No.
If any of your buddies ever pressure you to take a drink, just Tell them you promised your dad you wouldn't. I'd do anything to keep you safe.
Okay, I will.
I hope this is working.
I promise. Love you too, Dad.
They really do hear you. For tips on what to say, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov.
We have a job to do out here today.
To be a winning team, you have to work like a winning team.
My team depends on me.
And my team is 50,000 strong. Looks like a lot of work's going into this.
This is what it feels like to be part of a team.
A winning team.
The Action Team.
Get in on the action at actionteam.org. Are you in?
Welcome back, and we are moving on with topics. New Nevada homeowners law went into effect at the beginning of the month. Homeowners will get additional protections from foreclosures as a new statewide bill went into effect October 1st. The law is known as the Homeowners Bill of Rights. It was enacted to help ease the pain for those who are facing foreclosure. Banks are now required to assign one contact person to the homeowner, and banks have to give homeowners a 30-day notice before determining a loan to be in default. Also, relatives can now buy the distressed property. Do you think this new law will prevent future foreclosures? And what is your opinion of the foreclosure situation in Las Vegas, especially in the last 5 years? Jason, let's start with you.
Well, this law is an extension of Assembly Bill 284, which required banks to present additional documentation when issuing foreclosures, or when beginning the process, at least. So what this bill does, it's known as SB 321, and what it does is it allows the homeowner, if they're going to go into foreclosure, they can call the bank and see if they can actually go and obtain a loan modification. That takes another 30 days if the foreclosure has been issued to them. Well, first of all, they have to also make sure that they contact the homeowner multiple times via email, phone, etc. They also have to send a few documents to them, etc. But this process has to take place within about a week's period of time. And if it doesn't occur, they can't contact the homeowner. And if they can't notify them of the foreclosure, then the whole process has to restart. Also, if you were to have a home and you were being foreclosed on, you could obtain a lawyer and you could try to restart the loan modification process multiple times, essentially delaying the foreclosure inevitably. I talked to one fellow who lives in Las Vegas here, and he lives in about a $1.5 million house, give or take. And he hasn't paid his mortgage for 8 years. As a matter of fact, the bank will not allow him to make a mortgage payment at this point because he's basically in the home, he's maintaining the home, and the bank sees that as a better asset to have than just the home sitting empty. Now, further ramifications from this law are going to cause homeowners or home builders to build an excessive amount of homes because you're going to have vacant homes that the bank will not sell back, known as shadow inventory, or you're going to have these people like the fellow that I know who are just sitting in their homes not paying their mortgage. So you're going to have, and we're seeing it right now, we're seeing home builders all around the valley building like mad. It's going to continue, and prices are also going to artificially increase. This has already happened in California, so it's going to be eventually quite detrimental on the market.
So this could be another housing bubble that we're...
That's what it sounds like we're building up towards another one from the way that you've laid it out.
Well, the prior bubble was because of irresponsible lending practices. This bubble will be because of basically inventory. There's an artificial decrease in inventory. So the fellow that I referred to, his home cannot be sold to somebody who can actually buy it, probably for cash or financing, because he's sitting in the home and the bank doesn't want to let go of that home because the market is so bad right now that if they were to sell that home, they would have to write off a loss. And the banks don't want to have to write off losses. That's why they're holding on to these homes.
So there are some reasons why this bill or the rules might end up helping prevent some of the foreclosures. The lending issue that happens caused the first recession, the banks will be less risk averse because they have to look at whether or not a person is more credible, because part of the new regulations require them to be able to get in contact with them, require them to disclose a lot more information, so it might be more beneficial in the bank's interest to ensure that the person they're lending to will actually pay the money back. So it could prevent worse forms of lending. And yes, there are other stipulations that have been passed that restrict that type of lending, but could prevent that. Additionally, it causes banks to.
I'll have to cut you off right there, but we'll come back on that comment after the break.
A full life, measured in seats, starts with the right ones early on. Car crashes are a leading killer of children 1 to 13. Learn how to prevent deaths and injuries by using the right car seat for your child's age and size.
Hey, you going out like that?
Yeah, why?
Well, what would the neighbors think?
I see you! Come look at Mr. Feather! Look what I have. Mr. Bird, remember? Bark, bark, bark. We're just playing. We're just playing on trying to get you out of here.
Even still.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of teens in foster care who don't need perfection. They need you.
If you drive buzzed, it could cost you around $10,000. You'll face major legal fees, major fines, and steep insurance penalties. You could lose everything. Nothing kills a buzz like getting pulled over for buzz driving, because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Maybe he's really focused.
Hey, Michael. Michael. Maybe he likes spinning the wheels.
Maybe he just loves trucks.
Maybe he's just being a boy.
Preoccupation with objects is one early sign of autism. Learn the others today. The sooner it's diagnosed, the better.
Welcome back. We're talking about a new law affecting Nevada foreclosures. And Alex, I cut you off before the break.
Yeah, I was just saying, in some ways, I think that these rules don't go far enough in terms of what they do for short sales. I think it might be more beneficial to change the whole short sale process instead of making it so you would sell it to someone else, working with the person who's trying to who's going to have their house foreclosed on if they don't decide to go to a short sale, and trying to lower their monthly payments and work with them if they're going to sell the house for a lower price anyway. Therefore, you prevent a person from his credit being destroyed, and you still end up having the same amount of equity in the house. It just causes their payments to be lower.
Well, how is this affecting short sales when there's already been so many short sales?
Well, I think that this potentially could increase the amount of short sales, which do take a lot longer than normal foreclosures, because it would make it so, you were saying earlier, it kind of prolongs the process, and there's also a new element of transparency, so people that would otherwise be foreclosed now have the knowledge that they can enter a short sale and delay the process.
Well, interestingly, this will actually decrease short sales. There have been a number of short sales in California when the SB 321 law, or similar law in California, was enacted. Many short sales were backed out of escrow because the banks, there's a variety of reasons why they backed them out of escrow, but we just know that a lot of them were backed out of escrow. So it didn't allow folks that came in that wanted to pay cash or that wanted to finance the property, didn't allow them to purchase the home. So, and keep in mind, when the short sale process is enacted, that's also happening tantamount with the foreclosure process. So the homeowner has to basically file all the paperwork as quickly as they can with the short sale process while the foreclosure process is beginning with the bank. And that's what kind of makes the whole process precarious. SB 321 will, in essence, overall, will allow people to obtain an attorney, stay an additional upwards of almost 5 years in their home without paying their mortgage. What AB 321 or AB 284 has already done for the past 2 to 3 years. So.
Do you mean that there's more people that there's less people entering the short sale process, or less people finalizing that short sale process?
Well, regardless of how many people enter the short sale process now, it will remain unlikely that those processes will be completed successfully because of SB 321. It's a very, very complicated law. It's highly sophisticated. It's going to basically decrease short sales.
Do you think, so are you saying this new law will create a loophole for homeowners that know the ins and outs just to stay in their home?
This law will allow homeowners to say, I want to stay in my home without paying my mortgage, because they're so jaded at this point. I mean, who is not jaded about the market?
Especially in Las Vegas.
Especially in this town.
Well, as
Right.
complex as it is, it seems though most homeowners would not be able to understand that process. Like you yourself, you come from a real estate background. That makes it so you are more knowledgeable on the subject. A realtor doesn't really have an incentive to work with someone who's going to lose their home because they're not going to get any commission off of it.
It's interesting, you know, every client that or every homeowner that I spoke to in the past, the first thing they would say to me if they weren't paying their mortgage was, how can I stay in my home as long as I can without paying my mortgage? And I would say, you should get an attorney. And that's what their goal is to stay without paying.
Well, on that note, we're going to go to break.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
I don't think anyone captured my first steps on camera. I was the 5th kid, and by that time, first steps weren't a big deal. I was 16 and driving home with my brother Ben. A distracted driver hit us. Ben died on impact. I had 47 days in a hospital bed for reality to settle in. With a major spinal cord injury, doctors said I would never walk again. But deep down, I knew I would. I prayed that every day. Family, friends, strangers, all started to pray for me to be able to walk again. The progress has been slow, and the victories hard won, but I feel the prayers.
Whether you need support in a tragedy or just to make it through a bad day, prayer can make a difference. America, let's come together by believing with each other.
For someone to come alongside you and say, I'm going to believe with you, it means a lot.
Thanks for staying with us. It's been a great show. Learned a lot about foreclosures, and I'll keep you in mind, Jason, in the future. Now you know what we think. Let us know what you think. Share your opinions and any ideas or topics you'd like us to scramble about to thescramble.unlv@gmail.com. You can also catch full episodes of The Scramble at UNLV-TV.edu. That's all the time we have for today. For all of us here at The Scramble, thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.